This is lesson 5.5, domain and range. We are going to go over the warm-ups, so go ahead and pause the video. When you have them done, hit play and see if you did them correctly. Okay, we have to solve the following equation for m. That means we have to get m all by itself. In order for m to be by itself, we're going to have to move the -4 and the 5k. In order to move the 5k, it's positive, so I'm going to subtract 5k from both sides. I cannot combine 1h and 5k, so this becomes h minus 5k equals 3m minus 4. Now, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. I cannot combine 4 with anything here, so I get h minus 5k plus 4 equals 3m. Now I divide both sides by 3, because that's multiplication. I undo that by division. My 3's cancel out. And this equals h minus 5k plus 4 over 3. That's what m equals. The first step I need to do in this inequality is distributive property. Negative 10x is less than 7 plus 3x plus 6. Now, my 6, my positive 6, and my positive 7 can be combined. So I get negative 10x is less than 13 plus 3x. I'm going to move the 3x to the other side with the negative 10. So I'm going to subtract 3x to both sides. Negative 10 minus 3 is negative 13x is less than 13. Now, I have all my x's on one side. So I look at my x. Is the number next to my x negative? Is the number next to my x negative? Yes. That means my inequality is going to be flipped. I divide both sides by negative 13. My negative 13's cancel. X is greater than negative 1. That's my answer. Okay, today we're talking about a function. The function is something that establishes a relationship between two quantities. The two quantities are called the input and the output. Guys, look over here. Computer guys, look over here. You guys, look up here. Computer people. Hey. Hey. Computer. Look up here. Now, who can tell me y equals mx plus b? What have we called that? Slope. Not y-intercept. What is this called? What do we refer to this as? Slope. Not slope and y-intercept. This is slope intercept form. This is slope intercept form. This is also a function. The value of my x determines the value of my y. Guys on the computer, you should be paying attention. The value of my x determines the value of my y. This is a function. I put something into x, I get my y out. Let's look at this. Y equals, let's say our slope is, what do you want our slope to be? 3. 3 times some x value plus 1. So my slope is 3, my y-intercept is 1, and then along that line, I pick out any x value, it'll tell me my y value. Or, if I just want to see where this line goes, I just make up an x value. 2. So y equals 6 plus 1 is 7. So 2 and 7 are points on this line. That is an input-output, a function. X goes in, y comes out. That is why input is also known as your x value, and it's also called your domain. That is also why output is also known as your y value, and it is called your range. Okay, computer people, go back to work. So when you hear input, it's the same as domain, it's the same as x. Input, domain, x, all the same thing. Dog, pooch, puppy, bark, bark, all the same thing. Output, range, y, all the same thing. Kitty, kitten, cat, meow, meow, all the same thing. One thing you need to notice is I is before O, D is before R, X is before Y. So if you're struggling to remember which one is which, X comes before Y in the alphabet. D comes before R in the alphabet. I comes before O in the alphabet. This whole side right here is first in the alphabet. So that might be a little trick to help you remember what's what. Okay, so how does this get used? X, which one is my domain, kids? X or Y? Which one is my domain, kids? X or Y? Which one is my domain, kids?
Y.
What? Which one is my domain, X or Y?
X.
Well, does X come first in the alphabet? Does D come first? Yeah, so X is domain, which makes Y my range. Y is second, R is second. I list these alphabetically from smallest to largest. Never repeat. So my smallest one here is -5. Cross it out. -4. -3. -2. -1. That's my domain. Now I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the first step. That's the beginning of domain and range. If you're going to list them, you list them from smallest to greatest. Never repeat. So you should be able to do number 2 on your own. Number 3. Now, number 3, I can do one of two things. I'm going to show you both ways. I can set this up as an XY table. And I can go to each one of these points. And I can determine, stop writing. I can determine, stop writing. You'll have time to write later. I can determine the XY value of each point. So I come to this point right here. It is at, that point right here is at -4 on the X and -4 on the Y, right? So then I go to this point. -2 on the X, -2 on the Y. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a point, but I'm going to make it one. It's at 0 on the X, -4 on the Y. Then we have this point. It's at 2 on the X, -2 on the Y. This point is 4 on the X, -4 on the Y. And we have this point here, -2 on the X, 2 on the Y. When you do your XY table, order doesn't matter. Okay? So now I'm going to go D equals R equals. I'm going to list my domain from smallest to largest, never repeat. -4 is my first one. Next, I have -2. Well, I have 2 of them, but I'm only going to write it once. Then I have 0. Then I have 2. Then I have 4. Then I do the same for my y's. -4. I have 3 -4s. Then I have -2. Then I have +2. It's okay that I don't have as many y's as I have x's. We'll discuss that in a different unit. All right? That's pretty simple, isn't it? But another way I can do it is this. Domain equals range equals. Instead of making my XY table, I could just go across the x-axis and look at each value on the x-axis. So, do I have a dot on the x-axis at 5? No. Do I have a dot on the x-axis at -4? Do I have a dot at -3? Notice how I went to where the lowest dot would be, so then all I have to do it is once. So then I go to -2. Do I have a dot at -2? Do I have a dot at -1? Do I have a dot at 0? Do I have a dot at +1? I'm simply going across the x and y axis. Now I go across the y axis. Go to the smallest number that I have a dot. That's going to be -3. -2. -1. Of course, my 0. And then my +1. I went across my x-axis, then I went across my y-axis. Any questions? Now, I have to figure out which one of these is correct. So, I just start with the first one. I start with A. Domain. Is domain my x or my y? It's the x. So, they say there is a point at 0 on the x-axis. So I go to 0 on my x-axis. This right here is my 0 value on my x-axis. Is there a point there? Nope. Can't be it. 0. Can't be it. So now I go to this one. 1 on my x-axis. Is there a point on 1 on my x-axis? Is there a point? Yep, that can be it. Is there a point at 2? Yep. Is there a point at 3? Is there a point at 3? Is there a point at 4? So this one's a possibility. But I have to also check my y-axis. So let's check the y. They say there should be a point at 1. When I go on the 1, I'm now going this way to find my y point. Is there a point at 1 on the y-axis? Is there a point at 2 on the y-axis? Is there a point at 4 on the y-axis? And is there a point at 5 on the y-axis? Yep. C is the correct answer. Now, just stick with me. I want to show you why D is wrong. D, go across your domain. There is a point at 1. There is a point at 2. There is a point at 4. There is no 5, is there? That can't be right. Okay. These are the steps. Don't write them down yet. If you're watching on the internet, go ahead and write them down. You can pause the video and write them down. In my class, do not write them down yet. Let's go over together what they say to do. What is step 1? What is step 1? So everybody do that. Write domain X range Y. That's what they said to do in step 1. What is step 2? Write the coordinates of the point for x and y. Now, you might not know what that means. Coordinates are 2 numbers in parentheses that represent a point on this graph. This is the coordinate I'm talking about right here. So, what is the x value of that point? What is the x value of that point? No. Where is it on the x-axis? It's at 0 on the x-axis. It's right at the origin. What is the value on the y-axis? 0. If it's at the origin, it has to be 0 for both. Now, if it's an open circle, I use less than or greater than. If it is a closed circle, I use less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. Is this circle open or closed? This is open, actually. If it was closed, it would be like this. It would be black like that. Okay? So that circle is open. So I'm only going to use either less than or greater than. Okay. Here is how you figure out what symbol to use. The line is the letter. So first the line is going to be the x. And we're going to pretend the x gets on a choo-choo train and travels down the line. So x is leaving 0 and going across the x-axis. See how this goes across the x-axis? And it's going to go choo-choo. And his first stop is right here. What's the value of his first stop? Yes, his first stop is at 1. Choo-choo. His second stop is at what? 2. His second stop is at 2. Are we all awake over there? Is the x getting bigger than where he started or smaller? He's getting bigger. The monster always eats the bigger thing. X is getting bigger, so he eats the x. And there's no line underneath him because it's an open circle. Let's do the same for the y. You see how this also goes across the y-axis? So Mr. Y gets on the train. Choo-choo! Comes to the first stop. What's my first stop at? 1. Gets back on the train. It's a long journey now. Choo-choo! Stops. Where does he make his second stop at? At where? 2. Is y getting bigger than 0 or smaller? Bigger. So the monster eats the y. Okay, for those of you... Oh, no, let's do one more. For those of you on the internet, we're going to do one more. You guys, I'll go back and you can write down those steps. Let's look at it again. What's the first thing I need to write, people? Domain. Domain, what goes with domain? X. Range, what goes with my range? Why? Because I asked you. Now, I need to fill in the value. What is the value of this point right here for x, guys? It is 0. What is the value for y? 0. You see, across the x, it sits at 0. Across the y, it sits at 0. So now, we get on our little choo-choo train. Ooh. Is the circle opened or closed? Closed. So I'm going to have an or equal to symbol underneath it. I get my x gets on the choo-choo train. Choo-choo. Stop number 1. Where's he at? Not 1. -1. So is x getting smaller than 0 or bigger? X is getting smaller, so the monster is going to eat the 0. My Y gets on the choo-choo train. Choo-choo! Gets to the first stop. Where is his first stop at? Not 1. -1. He went down from 0, so that's at -1. So that means my Y is getting smaller. So the monster is going to eat the numbers. And what's the last thing I have to remember to do? I have to have a line underneath my monsters because this dot is closed. Okay? All right. For those of you watching on the internet, I hope you enjoyed our program today. If you have any questions, please feel free to stop by. Thank you. Have a nice day.